Good afternoon, good morning, good night, wherever in the world you are. Zimbabwe is a failed state. We are stuck in a rut. And one of the main reasons for it is the failure of the opposition to move the country forward. The opposition was the current one, the MDC, which has now moved into CCC, was launched in the late 1990s with the primary purpose of introducing the democratic changes that the nation had realized they needed to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. So the party's name, Movement for Democratic Change, was based on that important effect, democratic change. They were riding on a wave that the nation had come to realize we need the democratic changes. Now, MDC was launched in 1999, 23 years down the line. We really have not moved at all. We are still stuck with the Zanu PF dictatorship. These elections are going to be rigged. What we needed to do is to implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. The democratic changes to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. That has not happened. The main opposition party, CCC, launched its election manifesto for 2023 on Tuesday. And let's just listen to some of the things that were said at this launch.
His main opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, through his party, the Citizens Coalition for Change, launched its manifesto on Tuesday. The 100-page manifesto set out a 20-point economic and political plan for the first 100 days of a CCC government. The party now aims to end Zanu PF's uninterrupted 43-year rule through the ballot on 23rd August, when its leader, Nelson Chamisa, faces off with Zanu PF President Emmerson Mnangagwa.
And we have got a troubled past in our nation. We have been through many trials in our nation. But our nation should not be looking back. It needs to be looking forward. And in Nelson Chamisa, I see someone who is a visionary.
Chamisa said his party would...
This is an interesting suggestion. This is David Coltart. He is a leading member of the opposition party, has been ever since the launch of the MDC in 1999. I have quoted in his book several times on these programs what he said after the 2023 elections. And we can just go through it again. This was him writing after the 2013 elections, reflecting and saying those 2013 elections were so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was to withdraw. Why he didn't withdraw, beggars belief. This is what has been the bone of contention all along. They would not withdraw. They participated regardless. That was being honest. And he was not the only one to say that. participating in the 2013 elections was absolutely nonsensical. You do not participate in an election process. That is so flawed. You know you're not going to change the result. And you know that by participating, you're giving Zanu PF legitimacy. But like he's admitting here, they participated because of greed. What is so disheartening is that they went on to participate in 2018 again, with no reforms implemented. And this year, 2023, they are participating and no meaningful reforms have been implemented. Zanu PF is rigging these elections. In 2 weeks' time, we'll all know the result, and the MDC will start complaining that the elections were rigged. What I find disappointing about people like David Coltart, and by the way, he wasn't the only MDC leader to pronounce that participating in these elections is futile. David was the other one who said the same thing. But of course, when they went back to the party, their colleagues had tried to talk them to realize that this was a futile exercise, participating. They found there were no takers. Just as SADC had tried to persuade MDC leaders during the GNU to implement the reforms, they were so comfortable in the GNU, they did not listen. What I find really disappointing is that here is David Coltart. We had got it right in 2018. Those elections were so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was to withdraw. But he also admitted that they could not withdraw because of greed. And yet, here we are, 10 years down the line. He knows that that was the foolish thing to do. And yet he is now telling us that it is the right thing to do. We should not be looking back, he says. We should be looking forward. In Nelson Chamisa, I see a visionary. What is the vision there in participating in elections that you know are being rigged? And that by participating, you are giving legitimacy to Zanu PF. What is the vision there? We can't keep on going round and round in circles on the same argument. The European Union had a strong team that observed Zimbabwe's 2018 elections. And they came out with the conclusion that those elections were not international standards. In other words, they were not free, fair, and credible. And they went one step further. They came up with 23 reform recommendations that, if implemented, will bring back Zimbabwe's electoral process to acceptable international standards. David Coltart, of all people, David, Nelson Chamisa, should have known this report. They must have seen it. They must have also read that the 23 reform recommendations. I have never heard any one of them pushing that those reforms should be implemented. They have not been saying to their fellow colleagues, gentlemen, we cannot keep on participating in these flawed elections without any of these reforms being implemented. Because all we are doing here is give Zanu PF legitimacy. And yet that's exactly what they're doing. It is laughable that they are now coming up with this 100-page election manifesto. 20 things that the MDC will do in the first 100 days of being in power. How are you going to be in power if the elections are rigged? We have failed to get into power all these years, these last 23 years, for no other reason other than that Zanu PF rigged the elections. You yourself have been complaining about it. And I can tell you now, come the 24th, the morning after the voting in these elections, CCC will be complaining that the elections were rigged. So they've spent all this time writing a 100-page document on election manifesto policies that they will implement. And yet they failed to come up with solutions to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. And to call themselves visionary, beggars belief. What kind of a vision are you selling to the people here? We're just repeating the same mistake over and over again. After 43 years of rigged elections, somebody is telling us that we can win rigged elections. And in this particular case, they go to town with economic policies, and yet have failed to come up with even one meaningful way of winning these rigged elections. Not even one. Their flagship strategy of winning these elections since 2018 was that we will have mass voter registration followed by mass voting, and then we'll guard the vote. Well, let's have a look at that. In 2018, or soon after thereafter, they promised that they will have 6 million new voters registered, ready for the 2023 elections. Most of these were going to be young people who have since turned 18 and are therefore then are entitled to vote. By May last year, 4 years into the 5-year period, ZEC revealed that only 250,000 Zimbabweans had registered as voters. Even if we assume that all of them were CCC supporters, that is only 4% of their own target of 6 million. So the first part of their strategy had failed. That failed to get mass voter registration. And therefore then the second one, the mass voting, at least it's not going to come from the new registered voters because they failed that bit. The second part, the third part, guarding the vote. Well, one of the things about guarding the vote is that you should have election agents present in every polling station so that they are there to make sure that there is no blatant cheating on the day of voting. The counting is done correctly. The results are announced correctly. Even in well-established democratic nations like the UK, USA, Europe, name it, when it comes to voting day, they will, in most cases, have an election agent who is just there to make sure that the counting is done properly. And yet, we've learned that in 2018, MDC Alliance, led by Nelson Chamisa, did not have election agents in all the polling stations. At the time when the 2018 election results came out, Chamisa was insisting that he had all the V11 forms, which is a summary of the vote count in each polling station. If you've got your election agent, a designated election agent in all those polling stations, part of the rule is that they would get a copy of this V11, or at least have access to a copy of the V11 form, so that they can also confirm that that is the correct result. That is the correct count of the votes. But if they're not there, well, then of course Zanu PF will do as they please. They can declare whatever result they want. They can revise the V11 form over and over again to top up their candidates' tally, who is there to dispute it. Particularly when we know that we are dealing here with a system in which the ruling party controls all the other state institutions involved in these elections. ZEC, the judiciary, the police, you name it. So at least having an election agent is absolutely the basic in terms of guarding the vote. And yet we hear that 544 polling stations did not have an election agent, which Chamisa had tried to deny. Only when he submitted these affidavits in the court challenge in 2018 did he finally admit that he didn't have all the V11 forms. Even then, at that point, it was not known how many were missing. It was only 2-3 months ago that he admitted in an interview with a South African television station that he didn't have election agents in 544. When Douglas Monzora withdrew his candidature in this presidential race for this year, he announced that actually in 2018, MDC Alliance had failed to have election agents in about 2,000 polling stations. This is nearly 4 times what Chamisa had admitted. The important message in that admission by Monzora was that Zanu PF had blocked a euro 3 million grant that had been offered to help train election agents of MDC, led by Monzora, Nelson Chamisa's CCC, and Zanu PF election agents. It's all very well for Zanu PF saying we don't want the money, but the other 2 parties definitely needed the money. In fact, in one of the reasons Monzora was resigning is that his party will not be able to find the alternative source of funds to train the election agents and to deploy them. So this comes back to our friend CCC. Will they have the money to do at least this last bit of their so-called flagship winning in rigged election strategy? Guard the vote. I think it's doubtful. CCC does not have deep pockets. So it comes back to what we're talking about here. CCC are participating in these elections, knowing fully well that doing so will only give Zanu PF legitimacy, and they're doing it for the sake of the few gravy train seats that are on offer to entice the opposition to participate. And what is desperately annoying is that somebody like David Coltart, who had actually figured that out for himself, or we assume he figured it out for himself, is now going back on that and telling us that participating in these flawed elections, when the only logical step should be to withdraw, is actually the right thing to do. How can that be? How can keeping on repeating the same mistake over and over again, sacrificing the nation to feed the insatiable greed of the few in the opposition leadership? Because they're the only one who are benefiting from this. They're participating because they're after the few gravy train seats. David Coltart himself is participating in these elections. He is standing, he has been a member of parliament, been a minister, and the last outgoing government, he was a senator. And now he's contesting in the council election with a view of being elected the mayor of the seat of Bulawayo. He knows that by participating and giving this regime legitimacy, we just keep on going round and round in circles here. And to call themselves visionaries, it beggars belief. It really beggars belief. Zimbabwe is a failed state. We are not going to get out of this mess by repeating the same mistake over and over again. CCC are not going to win these elections big. They are not going to form the next government. Why they bother producing this 100-page election manifesto stating their policies that they will implement in the next, it's just beggars belief. The number one priority here, which the people of Zimbabwe have risked life and limb to elect them into power, was to implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. The party's name's original name carried that promise. We are a movement for democratic change. But when they got into power during the GNU of 2008 to 2013, it was more comfortable to go along with Zanu PF, to share in the spoils of power, and they forgot all about reforms. And even when they realized these elections are so flawed, so illegal, the only logical step was to withdraw. They could not do it out of greed. And now it seems like he has completely flip-flopped. Now he's advocating, participating in these elections, perpetuating this meaningless circus, and pretending this is being done by visionary leaders. I think ordinary Zimbabweans need to wake up and open their eyes and realize that the MDC/CCC they voted for all these last 23 years for the principal purpose of implementing the democratic reforms designed to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. have completely sold out. They have now become Zanu PF's junior partners, participating in flawed elections to keep Zanu PF in power for the sake of getting a few gravy train seats. And for the other small opposition parties, they are eyeing the pollard free speech that Mnangagwa is thrown in to make sure that there is a lot of interest in the opposition camp in participating in these elections. These politicians are not doing us a favor by participating in these flawed elections. They are doing themselves a favor. And they are doing the whole nation a big disservice by perpetuating the dictatorship. We need to go back to the national consensus of the late 1990s that we need democratic changes. Just because MDC sold out and they failed to implement even one token democratic change in the last 23 years, including 5 during the GNU when they had the golden opportunity to do so, does not mean we do not need those democratic changes anymore. We need them. And we need them more urgently now than ever before. 43 years of rigged elections. It's absolutely insane to believe that we can have strategies of how to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections when we have repeatedly failed to do so. And what CCC are doing here in focusing on this election manifesto, and I'm sure the remaining 2 weeks of these elections, they'll be hammering on those election manifestos, drawing people's attention away from the political reality that Zanu PF is rigging these elections. In fact, drawing attention away from the fact that CCC, in participating, they've made it easy for Zanu PF not only rig the elections, but they're even gifting them the opportunity to do so by failing to do even the most basic act of guarding the vote by having election agents at every polling station. I do not think CCC leaders will ever tell us how many polling stations they would have failed to field election agents. It's not an easy job in the present situation where there's so much intimidation. Some of the election candidates participating in these elections have been forced to go into hiding to run away from Zanu PF intimidation. What more election agents? The intimidation will be even more intense. But in this particular case, it looks like Zanu PF does not even have to intimidate these election agents. They're not there. CCC doesn't have the money to make sure that they've got election agents. Ideally, there should be at least 4 election agents at each polling stations. That way, you can monitor meaningfully what is going on. To have only one individual, I think, is pushing one's luck. To have none at all, you despair. You honestly despair. I don't see how Mr. Coltart can call Nelson Chamisa and the rest of this Triple C leadership visionaries. This is the most ridiculous statement. He is just a sycophant singing for his supper. He needed Nelson Chamisa to endorse his standing as a councillor in Bulawayo, and to endorse that if he should win, the party should rally behind him and get him elected as mayor of that city. And he is calling Chamisa a visionary. That's his thank you. Singing for his supper. I think Zimbabwe has got to get away from this. We can't have individuals who keep on ignoring even the obvious things that they themselves have at one point admitted to, just for the sake of their selfish gain. This is an outrage. These elections should not have gone on without reforms. And to keep on pretending that these elections are free, fair, and credible is ridiculous. And to keep on calling those who are selling out of greed and incompetence visionaries. Oh, unbelievable. We have got to end this madness. Zimbabwe cannot afford to grant Zanu PF legitimacy and have to put up with another next 5 years of this corrupt and tyrannical regime. People must wake up and realize, even with 2 weeks left, they must wake up and realize Triple C are not offering them a way out of this hell. Triple C are only after finding some of the few gravy train seats that Zanu PF is offering for themselves. That is all they care about. There is no vision in this. There are no visionary leaders here. When has corrupt, incompetent sellouts ever been called visionaries? That's ridiculous. This idiotic position of Triple C participating in flawed elections, knowing that all they're doing is giving Zanu PF legitimacy and perpetuating the dictatorship, must be denounced here and now and loudly. Let's not wait for the 24th of August to denounce it. Denounce it now. The best result we can get on the 24th is that Zanu PF is denied legitimacy and the country is forced into a new GNU so that we could finally implement the democratic reforms and get the nation back on a democratic footing. That is what we should be looking at. Thank you and good night.